Jonathan, ascolta. Aspetto lui o no? Anche perché sarò molto veloce, quindi poi li passo. Conviene chiamarlo subito. Ok. Siamo? Sperimentazioni di sharing video, no, di streaming video. Okay. Is Jonathan listening?
I think so.
Okay.
Yes.
Are we online?
Yeah.
Streaming?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
Okay, so good evening, everybody here and maybe online, someone. We are very experimentally streaming this event. Yeah, it's part of the experimental attitude I think we learned through all these different stages of the course. This is the end of a very, maybe not long in terms of time, but very intense and deep exploration path through data, through very complex issues. And the title of this final slides, I think, is also reminds us what is the purpose we extracted these challenges from a call from European Union. So this is what European Union considered to be the most important challenges we'll have to face in the future. So these are very complex challenges. The European Union believes that we have to engage with these challenges, but that's not easy. I mean, to engage decision makers and the public especially with these issues that seems to be the ones that we will have to face in the future is not at all an easy job. And we as designers, we have, I think, the competences. We have this, I think, extremely important attitude to try to grab the attentions of users, and that's what we do as communication designers. This is a quotation from Stephen Few idea of what should be engagement with data. So we have, I think, all the tools and the skills we need to try to get this sustained attention by the people with the kind of artifacts we are able to design. But it's not easy at all, especially if you want to increase the understanding of these people and maybe even more to try to mobilize, to activate these people towards an action. I think this is a very complex challenge. I mean, we tried this year with the interactive installations, and I think it has been very hard for all of us, and for you, for us, and it's not easy at all to try to be physical, to go for interactive installations. It's not at all easy, but I think it's a good step towards public engagement. But it's not easy again. I mean, you probably will see through the installation how difficult it is to grab the attention of people, to get them involved and to guide them into the complex issues you have been able to cope with. So that's, I mean, it's just the beginning, I think. We are experimenting. Is a kind of a new field that many people are exploring and doing some experimentations with interactive physical installations related to data. I think is one step further we made with this very important for us course, this final studio here at the Communication Design Master Program at Politecnico di Milano. So we decided also to involve a couple of people, different actors in the discussions around how to make data public. And these guests, that will be the lecturers today, are first of all Jonathan Gray, that I thanks very much. I would have been, I would have appreciated him come to us, again, being here for the lectures, but he couldn't afford that. But he's now listening, and he will soon speak in a call conference now. And Jonathan Gray, this is the Twitter account of Jonathan, and he's writing a book that's written here on data worlds. He's a fellow and researcher at the University of Bath, and he's just released a piece on datafication and democracy that I think explain in a way what is his engagement with the idea of trying to bring data into the hands of people and to activate people through data. But I'm sure he will be much more able than me to explain what he does and why I think he shared with us the idea that going towards the public with data is an important challenge nowadays. And the second person we invited is Guido Romeo, but you have seen him going around these installations. He's a journalist. He's a journalist that is pretty much engaged nowadays with very complex issues like transparency of data and information. And he's also a person that is, I think, working in the direction of bringing this data into the hands and of people and try to increase the understanding of people about some very complex issues. So I just leave the floor to them, and if you have any questions after, I think it's a good way of closing our exploration. We have two expert people from the, let's say, mediascape with different perspectives, different angles that can really help us in understanding the meaning of what we are doing, what we have done, and what we maybe could do in the future as communication designers. So Jonathan, welcome with us, and I just give you the floor and let you talk about your presentation. Thank you for being with us, if you are with us.
Yes, indeed. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, I think pretty well.
Fantastic. Okay. So first of all,
1 second, we don't have your screen. Just
Okay.
a second. Okay. Here we are.
So first of all, thank you very much to Paolo and Michele for the kind invitation to give this address at the Density Design Lab's 2017 graduate exhibition in Milan, which I actually consider a great privilege given the pioneering work that your group has produced over the course of these past few years. Today, I will aim to give a bit of a reflection about the significance of data visualization and its role in shaping the future of the data societies that we live in. And of course, an appreciation of the politics of data is surely even more important and even more challenging in the so-called post-truth era that we are now said to live in. Oh, can you still hear me okay? Yeah. So in a manifesto, oh, can you still hear me okay? I've lost my audio. I can no longer hear you. Great, I see the slides just being queued up.
Can we? Yeah, we can hear you.
Ah, perfect. Okay, great.
Yeah, you can go on.
Okay, sorry. So in the first slide, I'm just sort of, I can see the slides are up. So in a manifesto for the Guardian newspaper in 1921, one of its editors, C.P. Scott, famously wrote that comment is free, but facts are sacred, a slogan which has become popularized to the Guardian's data blog. Now, in the light of the previous year or the previous 18 months, surely this is a very hopeful and optimistic sounding phrase. After a year in which we were told that citizens have had enough of experts, a year when facts about everything from climate change to migration, economic trends to political events have been challenged, contested, politicized, and are no longer taken for granted. As well as established institutions of fact-making being challenged, we've also seen the rise of other cultures and ways of viewing information, from the alternative facts of Trump administration councillor Kellyanne Conway to the production and circulation of so-called fake news in countries around the world. In his final speech before leaving office, former Vice President Joe Biden spoke of the dangerous proposition that facts no longer matter, suggesting that this posed a threat to the liberal international order through which could indeed collapse, leading to a world where the strong impose their will through military might. Now, one of the questions I wanted to discuss today is what kind of role data and data visualizations might play in this post-truth, post-fact world. How might these developments lead us to think differently about data and data visualizations and their role in collective life? As you may know, the word data comes from the Latin datum, which means thing given. However, as I'm sure you've learned through your various projects, data sets can often be messy, complicated, contingent, and not at all straightforwardly given. There is quite often a lot of work or data work that is required to assemble, clean, align, analyze, interpret, and transform data sets, not to mention the social and political work that goes into making and building consensus and agreement around them. While Edward Tufte famously says that we should let the data speak for itself, as I'm sure you've found in your projects, it is not always exactly clear what the data would like to say, nor the best way to say this. While we should indeed always spend time listening to our data, the process of figuring out how to find meaning, narrative, and experience in this material often unfolds as a process of negotiation between different elements, including people and software, visual forms, and code. As I'm sure you've found in your projects, this process of negotiation can be just as much an art and a craft as a science. And rather than taking the data that this craft depends on as given, it is important to consider the things and processes upon which data itself depends. The historian of science Theodore Porter characterizes the creation of quantitative data about the world in terms of an aspiration for what he calls thin description, which involves various kinds of work to make different aspects of the world comparable across space and time, and to render different aspects of the world as quantities, whether through measuring, counting, aggregating, or evaluating. These thin descriptions, of course, carry enormous advantages. Attention can be drawn to very specific aspects of diverse and complex phenomena, such that our attention can be restricted to just a single number or just a single point, and letting other aspects of the phenomena recede into the background. And the next, yeah, exactly. So it is precisely the thinness of these forms of quantification and datification that makes it possible to see and experience patterns and dynamics that might otherwise be difficult to detect, such as in this paradigmatic case of Jon Snow's cholera map, which you see here. But making data is not simply about representing different aspects of the world, but also articulating and performing the world in different ways. As Ian Hacking argues, data contributes not only to measuring populations, but also to making them, as is the case with, for example, the classification of diseases, such as multiple personality, which represented not only a new form of illness, but also this created a new social group which could be said to be suffering from it. In this sense, these sorts of thin descriptions may be considered to be productive. For example, when we create indicators or rankings about ideas and values such as openness or livability, innovation, competitiveness, and sustainability, we aren't just picking out pre-existing aspects of the world, of course, but we are creating the conditions of possibility for seeing, experiencing, understanding, responding to, and interacting with the world in certain ways. Data not only represents different aspects of the world, different parts of the world, but also contributes in itself to making different kinds of worlds possible. And data visualizations, I would contend, have a very important role to play in the mediation of these data worlds. So data visualizations in this sense may be considered part of the front line of datafication, making possible certain kinds of visual experiences of data, not only by rendering different patterns and relations observable, but also by giving us a kind of visual language with which to think with, through, and about data, and everything from timelines to charts to dashboards and all kinds of things. Now, I really enjoyed looking through all of the different projects and seeing all of the different visual forms which are used to create experiences and stories with data, including combining maps, alluvial diagrams, charts, grids, networks, and images, and of course bubbles, or palozzi, as I hear that they're called in Milan. There were two kinds of world making which can be noted in relation to this year's exhibition and the works that I've seen online. Firstly, there are the world-making capacities of your projects, which issue from different styles of visual reasoning, visual analysis, and visual experience. Just as the invention of the timeline or the network diagram facilitated different styles of reason and experience with data, which had not previously been possible. In a similar vein, this exhibition, from all of you, shows that density designers are defining new forms of storytelling, new ways of bringing together data, image, text, and code into web-based interactives, and new genres of data experiences through your work. Now, one of the things that I particularly enjoyed in many of this year's projects is the question and answer based workflow diagrams that show your reasoning and the data work behind the visualizations. And that's, I think, the next slide. Including the data, the methods and approaches that were used, and how the data was generated. And on the next slide, these are also fantastic as a way to show what is involved in the data visualization process and to cultivate a broader critical literacy around what is involved in making the data worlds that you explore in your work. I've been collaborating with several researchers on the use of networks as a visual form which is used to work with, reason with, and display data in journalism and social research. One of the things that we've learned is that networks are used in quite different ways in different settings. For example, while researchers often use networks as exploratory devices to discover patterns of relations, for example, journalists often use them as explanatory devices in order to clearly demonstrate hidden ties or unexpected connections for their audiences. These different modes come with different methods, different ways of working, and ways of seeing with networks. While we may be tempted to see vision as something that is direct, spontaneous, and natural, it is important to remember, of course, the many different kinds of cultures and traditions that seeing depends on. The late John Berger wrote about this in his masterpiece, Ways of Seeing, and I would argue that many of his arguments and insights about visual phenomena, such as fine art and advertising, also apply to the ways of seeing associated with data visualizations, as we've written the paper about with Paolo. Another perspective on visual world making is available in Scott McCloud's excellent Understanding Comics, which explores the worlds of experience and narration which are made possible through different visual forms and conventions of comic strips. As you point out, often in a way which is very funny, the ways that space and time are articulated through the boxes and speech bubbles that are so familiar to us is extremely interesting and not always intuitive. And I'm sure in the future that researchers will look back to the archives and the legacy of density design as a crucial source to understand the craft of making worlds and experiences with data in the early 20th century. Now, the second form of world making, which I'll mention, I thought it was striking that so many of the projects were transnational in their scope and focus, from climate change to migration, culture to terror. And of course, it's good to know from Paolo that was part of the context was because of the focus of many of the projects related to various EU sort of initiatives. Now, there is, of course, a long tradition of exploring collective life at a planetary scale in data visualizations, from the internationalist experiments of Otto and Marie Neurath and their Isotype Institute in the first half of the 20th century, which you can see on the left, to the late and great Hans Rosling's work looking at global trends with the Gapminder Foundation's Trendalyzer tool, which you can see on the right. Through so many of the projects in this year's exhibition, one becomes aware of the relations, dependencies, differences, and commonalities between and across countries, making visible the planetary scale patterns which we are normally not able to see in our everyday lives. So just as the Earthrise image that you see here, which was taken for Apollo 8, occupied such an important and prominent role in the popular and political imagination of the 1960s, so data visualizations have taken on a crucial role in relation to how we understand collective life in the 21st century. Here I'd emphasize the role that data visualization plays in relation to other projects and practices of world making in the second, much more literal sense of planetary scale coordination and integration, from map making practices to global statistics, global data flows to international institutions focused on everything from cultural heritage to migration to energy. Here, data visualizations help not only to represent and communicate information, but also to undertake rhetorical, cultural, narrative, social, and political work in relation to the collective task that our sociologist colleague Bruno Latour describes as composing a common world. As he puts it, imagine we're in a plane from the land of previous ages, en route to an imaginary globe which we cannot reach due to the limitations of our planet. So where can we go? In the midst of backlashes to globalizing projects in many countries around the world, how can we redefine a new path for collective life in this comparatively narrow band of inhabitable space that geologists call the critical zone on Earth? Now, finding ways to explore our interdependencies to render connections and facilitate shared understanding and bonds of solidarity between people in different places has surely become a defining task of our time, particularly in the face of urgent transnational challenges, such as the potentially catastrophic impacts of climate change, as well as in response to the current political trajectory of the United States and many other countries around the world. This year's projects demonstrate a range of ways to take measure of the world through data, which brings me to my final point. It is crucial that we don't lose sight of the question of what is measured, how, and to what end. Just as it takes a lot of work to make data visualizations, so too it requires work to create data, of course. So what data is created is in turn shapes the kinds of data visualizations, data experiences, analysis, and storytelling which are rendered possible. Now, we're in the midst of some major challenges and changes in the global production of data, not least because of new forms of born digital data and big data. And I was very happy to see that with this year's projects from Density Design, you have looked at both official data and web data in order to show what is possible with these different sources. digital technologies make it possible for people not only to use data, but also to participate in the making and shaping of data. So my final reflection to you all is to think about how data visualizations facilitate not only public communication and public understanding, but also, as Paolo sort of mentioned just now, more substantive forms of public engagement, involvement, and participation. Now, here we may benefit from debates between John Dewey and Walter Lippmann in the early 20th century, who said that there is essentially no such thing as the public, which is an abstraction, essentially, but rather there are many different publics with many different interests. And what becomes essential with this shift is to understand how these publics are formed and the different mechanisms through which they are able to organize and mobilize around issues. As the sociologist Noche Marez puts it, no issue, no public. Now, drawing on this kind of analysis, more recently people have discussed data publics. And so the thought that I will leave you with is to consider the role that data visualizations can play in assembling and supporting the capacities of these data publics, which is, of course, not trivial. Different kinds of media facilitate the gathering, mobilization, and movement in different publics in different ways. Given that density design graduates have gone on to do such important work in advancing the state of data visualization at organizations and institutions all over the world, I'll take the opportunity to plant a small seed for whatever you do next and wherever you go, in the form of a question. What role might data visualizations play in developing capacities not only to use and understand data, but also the capacities to actively participate in shaping the future of the data society? In other words, how can the craft of data visualization develop so as to include and engage people in processes of making data and understanding how data is made, so as to support them in becoming data citizens rather than just data subjects? Congratulations to you all on an outstanding set of projects, and I wish you all the very best of luck with your future endeavors. And thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan, for your kind words and for what you said. I think you said a lot of things, and I think we will have to reflect on that for a couple of months. I think we have enough to think about in our how to maybe reshape also our course next year. I hope we will be here again to try to do what you suggested. But in a way, you concluded with a very difficult question to answer. I mean, I really feel that the difficulty of of answering to your question. I mean, engaging this very difficult to define public and mobilize and activate people really seems to me a very difficult challenge. So I'm sure there is something that designers can do, but sometimes I really feel to be facing a very difficult challenge. So I know that it's very difficult what I'm asking, but can you try to give us some directions? I mean, you're probably you have a different background, a different perspective, and that's very, I think, very important for us. But can you give us some directions in a way? So what do you think could be more beneficial for us to investigate in this very broad area of shaping data experiences for mobilizing these publics, plural? So what should we focus on in your opinion, from your perspective? I think did you have any kind of suggestions to maybe try to build on our experience, but to build the next what could be the next version of our studio-based course? I mean, we always say that we change everything every year. So every year is a new edition, is a new challenge. We try to modify. We never repeat what we have done the year before. So what maybe can we add to what we did this year? In which direction we should look, in your opinion, to try to answer your questions?
Well, I think one of the things that I loved about what you did this year was by taking two approaches to similar issues. You took official data and you took to web data. You effectively started to address that question in a way which is extremely interesting, because you on the one hand looked at how, for example, an issue like climate change or migration was sort of rendered as an issue using official data, and which gives rise to different kinds of experiences and analyses. It makes the kinds of work that you're doing possible in a certain way. And then in turn, the sorts of visualizations that you create enable other kinds of experiences and interactivity around that data through sort of your web projects. But on the other hand, what you did is, I liked the way that you then explored those issues, the same issues on the web, including trying to start to get a sense of how they look in the wild from a different perspective, using sort of born digital data as opposed to official data. So I think there are definitely avenues, I think, to explore for understanding the sort of not only the data publics, but also the sort of potential data publics, the issue publics that are related to a topic that you look at. So, for example, sort of climate change and migration. So I think that opens up one whole area for exploration, is tracing the circulation of data and tracing the sorts of things that it gives rise to, and there is all kinds of interesting work that can be done, and which you guys have excelled in doing over the past few years in order to make that sort of exploration using digital methods more accessible, which I think is very important. The second thing I would say is that through projects like Climaps, you have also engaged in processes of participatory design, which I think is extremely interesting. So designing data visualizations with the intended publics or intended beneficiaries. And I loved the way that you had, it was an official working for the UN, who said that at sort of one of the events after the sort of Climax projects, that this was one of the best examples of kind of the revolution that was possible in the relationship between research and policy. I think partly, surely that was that sort of very positive response was partly as a result of working closely with the intended publics of the sort of data visualization project. I think there's a lot more interesting work that can be done with co-design and co-production. I think the third thing that I would say is, I'm very disappointed. I mean, ironically, one of the reasons why I'm not there in person, I would love to be there in person, is because we're kind of preparing this collaboration that means that several of you, and I think others from Density, will be together in Amsterdam sort of next week for a very exciting new project, but which has been keeping us very sort of intensely busy. But the third thing that I'm extremely interested in, I think, in this direction, is precisely what you've been doing as the other part of the projects and sort of the exhibition, which is the physical installations. I think one of the things that I was very struck by was Otto Neurath, who was one of the people I mentioned, who worked with Marie Neurath, his wife, for this Ice Type Institute. One of the things that he did was he did these sorts of early data exhibitions. And one of the things that he did that was very interesting was he very quickly realized that rather than putting them on in a museum or a gallery in the middle of town, where he discovered, during the day, that really limits, if you work, that really limits what you can go and see, right? If you've got your job and you can't also go into the middle of town during the middle of the day to kind of see an exhibition. So what he did was he had these kind of mobile exhibitions which would move around to where people were. So after they finished work, there would be a traveling sort of data exhibition going to their neighborhood, sort of after they'd finished, so they could go and see with their sort of family. I think this idea of looking for different ways of making data physical and visible, and also being attentive to the kind of cultural dimensions of data visualizations as a form of expression is extremely interesting, and something that I'll be very excited to see where you guys kind of go after your experiences with this year's projects. And I also look forward to being in Milan in person to see some of the projects, hopefully the ones that are still around kind of over the coming months. So that's three things.
Yeah, I totally got it. I think it's, yeah, you gave us in a way some confirmations of what we tried to do this year, but I think also some very good ideas on how to extend and to build on top of that. For example, the idea of reflecting on the publics while doing the work on the web. I think it's a very, very interesting idea. I think we didn't exploit that so far, so I think we can do that. I mean, we can use especially this, what we call the second phase, in order to try to understand better what could be, or what kind of public we can create or build around the issues, and that's very interesting. Thank you, Jonathan, and I hope you can stay with us for the second lecture. There's a contribution from Guido Romeo from Sole 24 Ore. I very briefly introduced you before, but you can introduce yourself. Okay. So, thank you, Jonathan, again. Hope to see you soon.
Un keynote, se vuoi. Spero che funzioni. Ma Jonathan è ancora online o?
Sì, dovrebbe essere online.
No. Hi, Jonathan. I just wanted to say hi. We met in Perugia some time ago talking about data, so it's good to have you here.
Yeah.
That's il keynote. Ok, eccoci. Vai sulla prima.
Ho bisogno del mattino?
No, vado senza mattino. So, well, thank you, Paolo. Thank you for having me. It's really special. I usually talk to journalism students who don't know anything about data or design, so I'm a bit worried that you guys will actually know more than what I know about the stuff we're talking about here. But so my pitch here is why journalism needs design, and I'm talking especially about data design, but not only that. And just to tell you where I'm coming from, this is how many of you know this guy here? Doesn't ring a bell. Philip Meyer. He's the guy who, well, he wrote many things. He won a Pulitzer Prize. And most important to me is that he wrote this book, Precision Journalism. I think it's been published at least, re-edited at least 4 times. And it's a book that you find in Italian as well. It's a book that was written in the late 70s after Phil won his Pulitzer. And it gathers a lot of the work he has done. So in the 70s, using a computer to, people were talking about computer-assisted reporting at the time, CAR. And it was like big mainframe computers, ASCII characters in green on a black screen. So it was really like hardcore stuff. All the data entry was done by hand. And it's interesting. It's an interesting read because it tells you what a paradigm shift it was when Phil started using data analysis from sociology studies to actually do journalism. And he won a Pulitzer because he basically recalculated, fact-checked the claims of the police on the participants to the Detroit riots. And to one of the Detroit riots, it was 73, if I recall exactly. And at the time, there was no internet. I mean, there was no web. If you take what Phil was doing and put it in the contemporary world, it's totally different. I mean, it's an explosion of possibilities. And so journalists are pretty slow, but they have understood that they do need designers, and they can use data for their interest. This is not a journalistic piece, but it's there are 3 reasons why we need you guys and we need more data. The first one is volume, and this is definitely a lot of volume. This is the Bible, and it's a work by Chris Harrison, if you don't know it already. And basically, it shows all the connections and inside the Bible when something is mentioned in one part, in one chapter, in one book, and where it's mentioned again. So all the purple and blue arcs are the closer facts, the more recurrent ones, and the big green ones are the more far distant ones. But it shows the level of complexity and also the level of interdependence of all the facts you find in the Bible. And it's a huge work. You couldn't do it, of course, without digital. I mean, this is obvious. This is something that is really editorial, and I always bring it to my journalism students because it's very effective. If we're connected, maybe they... No? Okay, we got the wrong link here.
Want to go back to presentation?
Yeah. I want... Yes. And... Okay, so it goes back... It's my fault because I probably put in the wrong link here, but let me copy this. Can I copy this? No. Okay, let's skip to another volume thing, which is actually what I wanted to show you. The second place. And it gives you better... Okay, the drones, you probably saw it. It's a piece that was in The Economist, and it shows what the drone killings that started under George Bush, and increased enormously under Obama, and how it went. Right, to give you an idea here, it's which is in items. Where are you? There you go. Okay, this is the nip. There you go. Well, this is animated, so it's great when you see it actually working. I'll leave you the slide so you can actually look it up online. But what you see is no, ma lascia stare. And what you see is the high-profile targets and the civil casualties, and it's very effective. It's very emotional. It won a number of prizes. It's something that you can do on print, on a static version as well, but it's just not as effective. So this is to give you an idea of what you can do with digital and how you need to design the experience. Because it's not only show the data, but it's also involve the user, your reader on a more emotional, on a more cognitive level. This is something I totally love, and I play with because I'm I have this really appeals to my nerdy side, and as a economics student, I would have dreamed of having this. This is the cost of money, and it's a cost of money from the 90s to almost today. It's done by the New York Times. So cost of money is basically how we see that it's an index that tells us how we see the future. If we see growth, there's high cost of money. If we're after a crisis, as in 2008, we see it pretty flat and pretty low. So this gives you a good idea of how we were looking at the world in the 1990s, and what happened during the different bubbles and the different crises, and then how we're looking at it now. And you can play with it. No, you shouldn't play this way with it. You should play this way with it. And you can turn it around, so you can just look at 1 year in perspective in the future and see how it compares to previous years, then you can just zoom in. You can do many different things, change angle. This is something that hasn't been done by design student. It's actually the work of the interactive media section of the New York Times, which is well, the last time I checked, it had something like 47 journalists and developers working shoulder to shoulder, and there's not a clear division between journalists and developers, because many times it's developers coming in to code and then starting to pitch their own stories because they have ideas. They come up with ideas and leads of their own, and that's we must acknowledge the American system with its flexible job contracts. It's much more, it's much faster in taking up these possibilities. In our, I was just telling one of your friends here, in our newsrooms in Italy, well, the last newsroom I was, I entered it 6 years ago, yeah, so almost 7 years ago. But the day I got in the newsroom, the editor-in-chief told me, next month we will have a developer, a coder, and we will do amazing things. When I left last year, they were still saying, next month we will have a developer, a coder, and we will do excellent data stuff. The second reason we need design is engagement. And this is probably the most difficult one. There's a huge debate on user engagement in digital media. Again, on the other side of the Atlantic, there are a bit more ahead of us in Italy and in Europe. The most important point is the metrics that you use on engagement. If you read the reports, it's mostly unique visitors and page views. That, of course, is a very volatile indicator. I think it has a certain level of perversity and of toxic effects, because they're not very loyal users if you just use that metric. So you tend to attract people with very shiny and very hot and strong headlines, but they come very quickly and they go away very quickly. So, and I experienced this firsthand. So every day you have to come up with something stronger, and it's not a healthy relationship with your users. So this is a blog post from Slate, and they announced last year a big shift, saying they were basically rejecting the unique user and page view system and looking at time on a page. So what does time on a page look like? You're fighting for shares of seconds. So if you look at this is a part of a report, you find the link in the presentation. It's part of a report from Parsley. Parsley is, of course, a metrics company and an analytics company, and they show that the average is if the average is well, this shows it even better. If the median is 46 seconds, the science technology, which is the one that gets more time on site, is 1 minute. So you're basically fighting for 14 seconds here, and shares of that. So it's not, it might not seem much, 14 seconds, but for advertisers, it makes a difference. So it makes a difference for us as journalists, as media. And well, the third point, of course, is great. It's evidence. It's wonderful, as our friend the Donald would put it. And this again is something that is getting enormous. Enormous is again another Trumpian word. But if it's really dividing, because if you see at the New York Times has seen an increase of its subscription with the election of Donald Trump, and clearly there's a handful of media that have a strong brand and that have an evidence-based, can brag about having an evidence-based reporting, and they have in some way benefited from the Trump election because they have come out as a reliable source. But evidence is something that does engage readers, and you also see that the New York Times readers have more time on the page, and what do they look at? So they look at things like, well, this is really, there was a New York Times thing before, but I put this in because Hans Rosling from Gapminder passed away a few weeks ago, and Gapminder, I don't know if you ever went on it, but it's fabulous. It's very simple. It's like statistical data, but it's the storytelling behind it is great. And this is one of his most famous charts, and it shows how GDP relates to health. So it's one of the main drivers of well, development, political instability, and many other things. This is something from The Intercept. Again, I will see if it collaborates and lets me show you this. No, it doesn't let me show you this. But anyway, the great thing about this map is it's an interactive map. It's not only like wide, but it's very deep, because browsing over this single count, those are state lines and county lines. So in Italy it would be provincia, basically, and you can hover over the dots, and you see in your own province or other provinces, you see what are the levels of toxicity in the water and in other parts of the environment. So this has been a huge success. There's an enormous work of design for the experience you have behind it. Again, evidence. This has been is again a huge topic. I was discussing fake news with a scientist before coming here, and of course vaccines. It's something that even in Italy it just comes back. It's something that is huge. The damage that Andrew Wakefield, who was a scientist who first came up with the crazy study, the fake study on the relation between vaccines and autism, the damage that guy did is still living on. It's incredible, and this of course shows how well you have it for different diseases, but it shows how the morbidity rate, so the infection rate, changes after the introduction of vaccines in every American state. And you can do it, of course, for any country in the world. This again is a much more recent work from Bloomberg, and this is fascinating because it's a dream come true for journalists. It's when your work actually produces change. They did a story called Amazon. Amazon doesn't consider the race of its customer, should it? And it was sort of a tweaking a slogan from Amazon. And so Amazon was, of course, saying we get you stuff everywhere, wherever you are. And in fact, it didn't, because the guys at Bloomberg showed that it was David Ingold and Adam Pierce. They showed that Amazon was not delivering, was not applying the 1 hour delivery. Actually, it was not going at all in certain neighborhoods of certain cities, like in Boston, in Rosebury, in certain parts on the south side of Chicago. Chicago south side is where Michelle Obama was born, and it used to be one of the toughest neighborhoods. It's still like a pretty poor neighborhood. And after this, Amazon had to change its policy and actually started delivering to those neighborhoods. So it's, you actually produce change, and it's great because, of course, you do great work on a very visible outlet. This, I will not, yes, it works. Okay, this is a GIF, and this is probably the smartest way to use a GIF on the web. The great thing, at first, when I first saw this, I was annoyed because I was like unable to read this stuff because it runs so quickly. But it's great in the end because it tricks you to staying there and then actually exploring what's happening. Because of the green line up there, that's the greenhouse gases, and the other line is the temperatures, and the other ones. The lines on the bottom are the other factors. And so Donald and Bannon and all the other guys at Bardart can say whatever they want, but this is evidence, and it's very clearly put. I mean, it's in a few seconds you see it. You can share this. You can also share this on Twitter, on the social media. So it's the packaging is fundamental here. This again is a classic from the New York Times, and we've tried to do it so many times in Italy and haven't been able, but if you want, it's a very simple thing. It's a diagram, and it's associated to basically a Google form questionnaire where you are asked to rate how important it was on two different scales, a positive, negative, significant, insignificant, and you could comment it. And of course, you see very clearly and immediately you have lots of volume here of data, but you see very clearly that Americans, by and large, consider it a significant and positive fact that Osama bin Laden was killed. And if you actually want to dig down, you click on those dots. The darker the dot, the more comments it has, because more people are in that, actually pointing to that score, and you can see how it, what people are actually saying. And this is wonderful to me because finally you have a way of making sense of all the comments you get on stories, because nobody actually reads them. I mean, journalists read the first 3 or 4, or maybe you have some software to analyze and pick out the most violent ones, but it's very hard to go down into like hundreds or thousands of comments. I'm getting to an end here, and this is well, this is one the Data Journalism Award a couple of years ago. It's a quadrant that I think will need to be updated with under the Trump presidency, unfortunately, but it shows very clearly at first sight what happens in American states in terms of homosexual rights. And it has been redone by a colleague here in Italy, which actually had to add one color, unfortunately, and that's a death penalty because he did it on African, of course, and it shows how in some countries, I mean, being a homosexual is not right. I mean, it's actually a huge liability. Just to finish off on a lighter note, you can do even like engage people in lighter stuff like an analysis of 50 Shades of Grey, and I use this a lot. Not that I write this kind of books, unfortunately, because that would be much more successful and would make much more money, I guess. But it's interesting to deconstruct a book and to understand how you dose things in books, be it storytelling, hot scenes, or other provocative material. The part I like here is the kinkiness index, because they calculated, they came up with this idea of kinkiness, and so a synthetic index. So that's pretty much it. I have one good news for you guys, especially those working in Italy, and this is This is also a personal note because with a couple of friends, well, more than a couple because it was about 32 civil society organizations, we fought for a law, we campaigned for a law starting in 2014. Who knows what a FOIA is, by the way? Okay, you don't count, I told you. So FOIA is a Freedom of Information Act. America has it. The first country to have it was Sweden. And back in, it was 251 years ago. But the most important one was United States in the 60s. And Italy got it last year. So 50 years after US. And 10 years after, 12 years after the UK. It makes an enormous difference for, it has made an enormous difference for the journalist community because a Freedom of Information Act basically is a law that says whoever can have access to documents and data from the government. Government at all its levels produces and collects a huge amount of data. Just think about data on water quality, human health, contamination, whatever. So we didn't have that in Italy. We had a very restrictive law called Law for Access to Acts. And basically, you had to say why you were interested to motivate your interest. Now you can just go up to any government body and also to companies that are participated by the state, like energy companies in Milan or in Lombardy, and ask them for data that is, of course, doesn't have to be sensitive in terms of commercial or national security or privacy terms, but you can get access to that data. That is important to build, well, for me, it's important to do information for my readers, but it can be important to produce works as the ones I saw this afternoon, and it can also help to build companies, hopefully. And this is a piece of work from our community. It's an open software that produces a free platform called Chiedi, and that helps you in Italy to request that kind of, to file a freedom of information request. So use it and use it. And that's it. So thank you. And if you have questions, that was too long.
No, more or less. Do you have questions, or are you completely done?
Aperitif. When is the aperitivo?
Well, the aperitivo is waiting. So thank you, Guido. It's I think I mean the more I listen to other people talking about what we do or what we should do,
we have lots of expectations about you.
Yeah, you have a lot of expectation, and we have a lot of work to be done. I mean, we have done, I think, a lot of work. There is still a huge, plenty of potential opportunities, and because I mean things are changing fast, and also this last thing. I mean, this Freedom of Information Act, it opens a completely new area of.
We'll see if it opens,
but yeah, theoretically, it opens
on paper,
kind of a field of opportunities, and so I think the good news at the end is that we'll have, I think, the ones that among you that will continue working on this kind of area. So how to shape data and information in a way that could have more impact in society. I think there will be more space than we have now to work on. So I think it's a very positive news that we can give to all of you. So the ones that will continue, that's I think a good news in general for communication design as well. So if you don't have any question, I think we can close with this lecture. And thank you again, Guido, and move to the aperitivo. The opening also of the exhibition, the work, the installations will be, the exhibition will be open until the 3rd, March the 3rd, I think, if not more. I think, well, I don't remember exactly, but at least it's the 3rd. And so for those who want to explore, experiment, and see the exhibition, the installations, I mean, you're welcomed. The building is open all day from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock, I think. Thank you and enjoy the aperitif.
Ragazzi, è finita!